listen, I get it. You were hurt before and you don't want to be hurt again. But you can't let the hurt of the past steal the love you deserve now. The reality is that we suck at relationships, and there's two real reasons why this happens. One, because we don't know how to identify what a love language actually is. And if you don't know what a love language is, right, we're going to dive into that, right? And how this actually helps you understand how people need to be loved, or where they lacked in love, and where you're supposed to actually fill in. And two, it's because we've never actually seen like authentic, wholesome relationships, like real, genuine relationships that care about the forgiveness. And now, I want to be straight, right? Sometimes we have seen particular family members or situations, but we don't know the sacrifice that those relationships took to create. Now, if you're listening on the podcast, you're gonna get the full like unadulterated version, right? All the full through. If you're watching on TikTok, you're gonna get whatever you're gonna get, and in YouTube, you're probably never gonna hear this part because I'm probably gonna cut all this out and make it seem really nice and flashy. Or I don't know, maybe I'll just leave it in so you know that there's other mediums of this. But I say that because I do tend to go on little tangents, and it's because these little thoughts pop in, and it's just a reality that these things that we don't talk about, right, or that we don't address because of other needing to look cookie cutter, needing to look clean, or needing to look whatever. Listen, let's just get into the reality of this. So the truth is that we need to know and identify what a love language actually is. Like the biggest issue is that we don't know that we all have different love languages, and that also means that we perceive love differently. Like knowing that this is how I like to be loved, and how I need to be loved, and then we're gonna talk about the reasons why, but we don't understand the magnitude of actually just simply knowing what your love language is and what your partner's love language is. And learning your own love languages will ultimately help. It'll help you know how you desire to be loved, but even more importantly, how you express love. Because sometimes this is the subconscious response, and we can actually be a problem, right? Because we don't understand that. So for example, so for those of you that don't know what the love languages are, one, there's a book based on this whole thing, a whole study on the 5 love languages, and it's just a common understanding. And I feel like this should be a common conversation, and I'll dive into that a little bit later. But this should be the first conversation you have with anyone, whether it's a romantic partner, or just a friendship, or whatever it is, platonically, whatever that looks like. This is a conversation you need to have with a person. Like you can't know how this relationship is going to flow and work, how I'm going to do things that are going to edify and support you, or how you're going to do things that are edify and support me, if we don't actually we're not actually able to identify that. So like the first one, right? Words of affirmation, telling people how you feel, letting them know that they matter, letting them know that you're grateful for them. But that happens with ourselves too, right? Sometimes, and again, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think this is so important to understand that sometimes we desire love the way that we weren't loved before, or we give love the way that we desire to be loved. Or worse, we love in a way that we've been imprinted that is an image of love that actually isn't an image of love. So words of affirmation, like if you never heard as a kid that you're good, that you're loved, that you matter, when you're an adult, that's going to be a tough thing for you to express. And understanding that your partner struggles with that same thing. So if their triggers are things that they've never received, you can't fully love them without understanding what hurt them. We can't fully understand what the person desires or needs if we don't know what they missed. Before we talk about loving anyone, we need to be able to identify the things that they were not loved in, because that's the fullness of love. Right? Being able to just completely give everything into somebody. So first one we said was words of affirmation. Our second one, physical touch. And this is, for so many people, they think that this is like an intimacy thing. Well, first of all, actually, yes, all levels of love, of these loves specifically, are intimate, because the term is not necessarily like physical, right? You don't have to be intimate in a way that's sexual. Intimacy is just a reality, understanding of your faults and weaknesses, and my acceptance of those faults and weaknesses, and vice versa. True intimacy is only found in vulnerability, like being absolutely who I fully am and expressing fully, even though I've been hurt for, even though I've been in all these things, because we tend to do that, right? We tend to allow the misery of our past to dictate the joy of our future, of our now, and we don't allow ourselves to be intimate with anyone else because we're not allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. So we stay in this ugly circle of the superficial level of love with no depth in it, right? But physical touch isn't just sexual things. It's literally the little things, like holding someone's hand, or hugging someone, or being able to just pat someone's head. I think we over dramatize what this kind of love is, because it's our social norm, right? We think that for us to show physical love, it has to be in a sexual way. Is that a form? Absolutely. Is it the only form? No. So we have words of affirmation, we have physical touch, we have gift giving. And no, I don't mean like fly you out to Dubai and that stuff. That's awesome gift, cool, but that's not love. That's use. Gift giving is and gift giving doesn't have to even be something that's financially tangible. Gift giving could be something that's emotionally attached. So, example, I love photography, right? I adore photography, or I saw an image, right, and this image was something that I really loved, and I bought it for myself, and I was like, you know what, I want you to have this part of me, because this part of me is so beautiful and something that I love so dearly, that I love you dearly, and I want you to be a part of it. Yes, we can buy people things, but that's not necessarily love. That's use. That's just capacity. It's okay, you're using me for this or this or that. If love is not just about buying the thing, this at least this love language is not just about buying the thing. It's about being able to give a part of something that I felt emotionally attached to, that I know that it's going to edify or love you through it. So loving you through the thing that I gave you. The fourth one is quality time. And I think this is such an underrated aspect of love. And again, and I'll talk about this a little more later, but sometimes the way that we were not loved is the way that we desire love, or the way that we're scared of love. Quality time is something that for a lot of people we struggle with, right? We don't know how to express time with people, because that time was never expressed on us. Like a perfect example of that is your father, right? Your mother, your guardian, right? They didn't spend time with you because they had to go to work. Hispanic people, my I love my Latinos, my people, I love ya, but we are so scarred by this love language. Like my grandfather. My grandfather would go to work and he would come home. He would go really early. He'll come really late. And his love language was never words of affirmation, and it was a lack of quality time. But his love language was gift giving, because in his mindset, I went to work and the fridge was full. He might have never said the words "I love you," but he'd ask you, "Did you eat?" That was his interpretation of that. Now, again, there's a trickle down aspect to all this, because now we don't see that love that was lacked there is something that we're perceiving in someone else, or afraid of giving to someone else because we never received it ourselves. That ties into that last one, which is act of service, doing something for you. And I think this is the most tangible love language. If it's not your love language, learn it. This is the love language that changes everything. Because being able to actually do something for someone that genuinely shows them, look, this is what you matter to me, and I want you to know it, and I want you to feel it. It's the most important thing. It's extremely difficult to say, hey, I love you, and I want you to hear it, but you've never shown me. There's this quote that I posted once that said, I can see what you're doing, so it makes me not believe what you're saying. Right? I can physically, tangibly see the things that you're doing. So the things that you're saying don't have value, because you might say something, but if you do something else, it's going to devalue that. It's super important to understand it, right? Because it's not just that one or the other, but it's a combination of these a lot of times. Like these ultimately are the makeup of how we accept and express love. However, there's always like that one that shines a little more, and often it stems from the way that we were neglected to be loved. Like that thing that we magnify is a thing that we didn't receive. And any healthy relationship, again, with platonic or romantic or even work relationships, I feel like so many people have such miserable work relationships because they don't know how to express the love that they need, or the love that the people around them need. And not to get too theological, right? Because I know that a vast majority of my following, and you might not be Christians, right? But just to express this aspect, because it's true no matter what the Greeks believed it to. We have eros, storge, philia, and agape, right? Eros is the erotic love, is the expression of love that is erotic, that gives the joy of sex and all these other aspects. A storge is the parental love, so the love of a mother, of a father, a family love. Philia, Philadelphia, a city of brotherly love. It's that brotherly love. So it's that camaraderie, that connection, and agape is the ultimate love, the highest love, which is fully sacrificing love, which is God's love. And for those that are Christian, that makes a little more sense. For those that somehow are from a Greek background, those things also make sense to you, whether you're Christian or not. But the reality is that we have these languages of love, and that we have these expressions of love, and the languages are part of the expressions, but the expressions are over a bigger span of things. So we need to to get to the core of these, like knowing why we love and the way we love changes the way we struggle to accept love. Like knowing where I was hurt when it came to my life and my wounds, is where I learned to accept love. There's a story actually of this wife, and it's actually in the first chapter of my book. Shameless plug. You guys will you'll hear about that a lot later when I'm officially done with all the proofing and all that stuff. But I tell the story in there because I think it's so important to understand. And it's the story of this wife who she gets married to her husband, and she's a newlywed and she's super in love with her husband, and they finally move in together. And being a newlywed wife, she wants to do all these things for her husband, and she wants to make him happy, and just be like a good, the good storybook wife. And she decides that she's going to cook this meal that her mother taught her, right? And the husband is in the kitchen, and the wife is taking this pernil, this pork shoulder, right? And she's cutting it up, and she cuts it in half and puts it in this giant pan. And the husband, just kind of curious because the whole pernil fit in the pan. He goes, "Honey, why did you cut the pernil when you could just put the whole thing?" Now the wife, being eager and a new wife, she wanted to show her husband. She wanted to find this information out for her husband. So she begins to call her mom. She's like, "Mom, I don't know why we do this, but my mom taught me, so I'm going to call my mom." She calls mom, says, "Mom, why is it that you taught me that every time we cook the pernil, we cut it in half and we put it in the pan?" And the mom says, "Well, honey, that's just the way your grandma taught me." So again, being super eager to get this answer for her husband, her new husband, she says, "Okay, let's go visit grandma," because grandma lived in town. So they get in their car and they go visit grandma. She asks grandma, she says, "Grandma, why is it that you taught mom, who taught me how to, every time we cook the paneer, we have to cut it in half?" And grandma says, "Well, that's how your great grandma taught me." So they get on the phone, they call great grandma, and she asks great grandma, "Why is it that you taught grandma, who taught mom, who taught me, that every time I cook the paneer, I have to cut it in half?" And grandma responds, and she's Dominican, so she says, "Mija, my love, my daughter," she says, "The problem was that I never had a pan big enough to fit the whole pernil, so I used to have to cut it in half and cut it and cook it in two different pans." Now, she was doing this thing that had nothing to do with the situation she's in right now. Like it was just a thing that was passed down through generations. A lot of us struggle with specific wounds and specific forms of love because somebody else struggled with it in our family. So these things were passed down in a way that they no longer hold value and no longer hold purpose, because for them it was a survival mechanism, right? Like the way they had to act or respond was to survive. For us, it might not be necessary. But unfortunately, it's so ingrained in our generations and in our families that when we respond in this way, we now give a new struggle to be passed on. Now we're not going to talk too much about wounds, right? Because we're talking about love in this episode, and the reality that love it supersedes anything else. But we have to understand that sometimes we struggle to love or struggle to be loved because of the wounds that no longer hold weight in our life. The wounds that were meant to be defense mechanisms at one point that no longer hold value in this current place you're in. And before you talk about being loved or how you love, you need to know why you struggle to love that way, why you struggle to be loved that way. Like what's happened before that creates this barrier and this wound. And I want to be clear because I hear it all the time. People say, "Oh, well, that's so easy to say, but you don't know the struggles of going through it again and again." Listen, I get it. You were hurt before and you don't want to be hurt again, but you can't let the hurt of the past steal the love you deserve now. It's at the end of the day, it's going to be a choice. And I got to be clear, this is where discernment and really sitting through and realizing and learning the person that you're with, that's where these things really kick in. And super important, the discernment stage of all of that. I mean, this is why this conversation needs to be had before you do anything else. You need to know the struggles and the love languages that person's speaking. But this is the pivotal point. This is the crux of it all. That you don't deserve to be in the same routine that was passed down through generations. So those things that were being given shouldn't continue to be given. There should come to a point where you realize that this is what's happened, and not to disqualify or to edify or to justify anything that a person has done before. We also take into consideration that these hurt people. Like think about it. If you have a scar in yourself, if you keep picking at the scar, it's just gonna keep being a scar. It's gonna fester. It's actually gonna end up getting bacteria. It's gonna get significantly worse. But if the covering that's over the scar allows you to not pick at it and not fester and let it heal, oh, this is gonna be deep. And that's the thing that helps you fully heal. It's more important to have a healthy covering in your life than it is to let the wound air dry. And what I mean by that is that the person you're with should be a covering, right? They should be able to fix and help the parts that you are not good at, the things that you lack at. They should be the fulfillment of that. And I want to be clear: there's no such thing as a soulmate, right? There's no one that ever completes you. That's not a reality. That's not a truth. That's just a very that's a very good marketing tool for movies, right? And you're just gonna bump into your random person, and they're gonna be your person, the one. No, that's just not the case. That's just you have so many ways of loving so many people, right? And you've not created in a way that you're limited to love. Your love is limitless, but this person should ultimately be a covering. They should be able to cover the areas where you lack, where you fall short, right? And again, we're sticking to the love languages here, but I think before we understand those things, we need to understand the things that aren't allowing us to love fully. So we have those 5 love languages. We need to also know where those love languages that we express are triggering, right? Like there are, and I'm not going to get too deep or too dark in this one, but there are certain things in life that are triggers, right? There are certain things that have happened that are ultimately causing us to not be able to receive that love, and even worse, run from it because of past things. So love is meant to be the most selfless thing, right, that you can ever give. Like it's like we're supposed to pour fully into someone. Like we struggle with healthy relationships because this really isn't like a concise thing that's being discussed. Like think about it. Sometimes when we meet people or we dive into this relationship, we have this conversation once, right? And it's just like, oh, what's your love language? Oh, you like this? Okay. And then you kind of keep that in the back of your head and, oh, they like gifts. Let me go buy them gifts. But we don't dive into the why. Right, we don't go any deeper. Like think about it. Like most people don't actually ask that why. Like their pattern, their partners love the way they love. Maybe a lot of people talk about like their love language in general and how they express it, but they don't actually talk about the reasons that these things are the love languages that they desire. Like they don't talk in depth as to why this thing hurts, and then we wonder why we can't have happy and successful relationships, because we don't know the reasons why our partners struggle with what they struggle with. We just say, okay, you went through these things and that was part of your life, but then what's the depth into it? What am I afraid to love with because of that? What's a wound that's stopping me from actually fully giving into that? It's like we struggle, we face sometimes make it really, really hard to accept different forms of love. And it even creates like a void in us that creates like this dependency on other forms to make us feel full. It's a conversation that needs to be had. It's not just what's your love language, is also why is this your love language? And how can I help heal the love languages that you don't identify with? Because think about it now. This is going to be like a really a mute in depth point. If the situation is that your partner, without what we didn't have this conversation, right? We're deep in, we're years into this relationship. We are really happy, whatever that looks like, or just, again, platonic, your friendship, right? Maybe you have years with this friend, this is a conversation that never went into there, and your love language is we'll just use a quick one. We'll use quality time, right? That's the love language that you love. But for them, they're so scarred in quality time because that's something that they've always been pushed away from. So they feel cold and distant. And for them, they don't like quality time. They don't like being around people for extended periods of time. It's hard to break that barrier without knowing that it's a barrier. Like it's hard to say that this is how I express love and this is how you're afraid to receive love, and how do we get through that without actually knowing that it exists. I remember my spiritual director says to me once, he said, I think about having, and this is again about God, and he said to me, but it ties into relationships because God is love, but that's shameless plug in there. He said to me, imagine the times you spent with your friends. Like you could sit on a couch and do absolutely nothing because you're such like comfortable with each other. You're so like good in each other's presence. He says that's how you should be with God. You should be comfortable with just sitting in his presence and doing nothing. But thinking about the relationships, platonic or romantic, we don't get to that point without actually knowing the things that affect the love of my partner, right? Like we don't actually get to that point. We fully get to that point because there's a lot of marriages that They get to the point where they're just like on their phones on the other side of the room, and that's it. Like we are coexisting instead of actually living together, right? We're cohabitating instead of actually living together, and that's a huge problem. That's where we begin to lose this fluidity of love. And again, want to be clear, not everyone, humans are humans. We are not always going to be happy 1,000% of the time. There's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be issues. But if we want to avoid, and we want to grow, and we want to be able to date people successfully, we want to be able to have healthy relationships, and we want to be able to do all these things, we need to be able to identify the whys in those relationships. And again, this is like a conversation that's a lot deeper, and for some people this is a lot later conversation, but I firmly feel that this is something that should be discussed before, right? Because if we understand what we need to grow through and work on, then it's going to help us work and grow on them. Now, the other key to this, right, and the other point why we don't have healthy relationships is because a lot of times the images of marriages and relationships we've seen, we haven't seen them often. Like they are just non-existent. And it's a very sad thing, because right now statistically, if okay, in faith-based relationships, so Muslims, Christians, whatever religion you practice, statistically speaking, divorce rate is lower than 10%, right? You're less likely to be divorced. Secular relationships in general, society, divorce rates at 51%. We see more people divorced than married, statistically speaking, right, out of the couples that are married. And the reason that happens is because, one, that the reality of not understanding the depth of our love languages and how we desire to be loved. Like we're good for a couple of years because those are the honeymoon stages, but when we're talking about going a long distance, we need to be able to understand the person fully and intimately, like in a way that we know the reasons why they struggle with what they struggle with. We don't have images of what those healthy relationships look like. I think about it. Most of the things that we do in our life, a lot of it's just plain old repetition. Like the things around us, relationships are like no less than that, right? Like it's the same exact feeling. We repeat the things that we see, whether it's subconsciously or consciously. It's one of the biggest influences in our lives. And if the influences in our lives aren't healthy, or we base our relationships on expectations like TVs or movie shows, right? Or movies, right? Like where people bump into each other and they romantically fall in love, which may oddly be worse, that's like our image of relationships. It's not successful, right? You're basing your relationship on something that doesn't exist. And for a lot of us, our images of relationships, we have our like, for better lack of words, are toxic, right? Statistically speaking, a lot of us come from broken homes. And for a lot of people that becomes the excuse. Like that's the why. This is what my family was like, so this is what I'm going to be like. But not you. You know that these are cycles, and you are going to change these things. And you're going to look at these wounds passed down from generation to generation, and you're going to decide that today it's the end of that, right? Like today I'm done choosing these terrible things. And then that the only way that we can actually do that is by being aware of it. Like we said before with love languages, but just relationships in general. Like what are your triggers? What causes you anxiety? And why aren't these like the regular conversations you have with your partner? I think, and so I know we've heard it so many times, right? And I think we've heard it like a million times that communication is the key to any relationship, but I don't think we understand how to actually communicate. Like without having an argument, like without having a fight, like without making it into this thing that it doesn't need to be. I think we struggle with communication because we struggle with listening. We struggle with understanding. Healthy communication is not just reminding them of like the dates or the things that need to be done around the house. It's inviting them into the healing journey that is your life. Your entire life is going to be a journey of healing. It's being so fluid with each other and pouring in so much in that intimacy that their hurt becomes mine too. And vice versa, right? We heal and we grow together. A lot of relationships could be saved if we understood why triggers are triggers and not just walked away without knowing the reasons why. Like I think that's such a beautiful reality. Being able to fully pour into somebody and knowing that my hurt is your hurt and your hurt is my hurt and we're gonna heal together. And I want to be clear, not in the sense of like trauma bonding, right? Because that's a thing that happens a lot. We look at the things that we suffer with, or the things that they suffer with, and we identify with that, and that becomes the love connection. No, I mean it in the sense of I'm gonna help you grow and heal, and that thing is no longer gonna be a part of you, right? To be clear, that's the antithesis of this, that we know that we are also a part of that healing process because we're going through it too. And there's not a single person in this world that could ever make the claim that they are like perfectly healed and have no problems. That's just not true. It's just not the case. We need people that are going to support us in that healing. We need people that are going to pour into us because they desire for us to pour into them. We need people that are going to look at us and say, look, I want to do this thing called life with you, but I want to be able to be a mutual exchange, like a reciprocity of healing and of love. And we can't do those things if we can't identify, one, what our love languages are, or our love triggers, right? That could be a great title for this, your love triggers. And two, what healthy relationships should look like. It's not so much about the aesthetic. I think one big struggle that this generation is really struggling with is that we date for aesthetics. We date for what it's going to look like. We date for the Instagram picture. We date for the conversations that our friends are going to have with us later and saying, wow, this person looks so good. We are so concerned about how other people view our relationships that you're afraid to be joyful. You are more concerned with looking good than you are with being happy. And that hurts. We have a generation of hurt, miserable people because they're so concerned on the opinions of other people. Look for what's healthy. Look for what's going to grow you and what's going to actually help your relationship flourish. So like I said in the beginning of this is going to be the podcast version. So the podcast version, you guys are probably going to get like a full like 30 minutes. The YouTube version, you're probably going to get like 15 minutes or so, but at least you're going to get like the editing aspect of it. I'm going to be flashy with it, but I hope to continue to do this. TikTok, you guys, you get what you get. Sorry. I hope to make this to more of a consistent thing. I know people have been asking for it, so here it is. And I hope you guys support. You can support by doing that whole like and subscribe thing, which I probably should cut this and put it in the beginning too. And I just hope that it helps people grow. Like that's my one goal with all this. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of this. And we'll see you next week, next Monday. That's what it sounds like these are going to be. Take care.